for this session 1B, still focusing on the progress achieved since last meeting 4 years ago. And this time we'll have a panel, first brief presentations, and then a panel, a longer one than this morning, to discuss the various issues. So now let's call the panelists right now, and first the chair, Pierre-Marie Abadi, CEO of ANDRA, then Mr. Robert Watts, who's Associate President, Canada, NWMO. You can come on stage and have a seat already. Mr. Shuzunke Kondo, who is President, Nuclear Waste Management Organization of Japan. Mr. Andrew Griffith, who is Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fuel Cycle Technologies, U.S. Department of Energy. Olivier Giraud can come too, Head of High-Level Waste Industrial Projects, France for EDF. And then Mr. Jussi Einonen, who is Director of Finland Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority. And to start working on this session, let's listen to Mr. Pierre-Marie Abadi, Chair.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this session this afternoon, this second session about recent progress and update. When we prepared this session with NEA and my team, we based this session on two approaches. One, of course, as the title indicates it, was to provide you with an international overview of recent progress made by different countries, but also to highlight the three main challenges we are facing in geological repository. Political acceptance, social acceptance, as we said, and we will see it with the siting process in Canada and Japan. Scientific and technical challenges, and we will see it with the US experience and the DOE. And operational implementation seen from the radioactive waste producer, with example of EDF, which is the partner and the financer of ANDRA. And we will finish, this is the third aspect, because at the end of the day we need permitting, the question of safety assessment and permitting. And of course, as you notice it, and it was already noticed this morning, it is normal and self-evident that Finland will be at the floor on this topic, because Finland is the first country to have a permit for construction. So let's start now with Canada. Canada is very well represented in this international conference in Paris. A large and very comprehensive delegation. And of course, we can understand it, because siting is really a challenge, and with your own national specificity, and progress has been made. And I already noticed many years ago that social dialogue was really a reference in Canada. So it's a pleasure for me to give the floor to Mr. Watts to give us an update about this question in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to make a representation to all of you on behalf of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and Canada more generally. I'd like to start off by recognizing Indigenous people of this land, and also, as the Chair indicated, to recognize our delegation here from Canada. We have representatives from Indigenous communities, from municipal communities, from government, from our board of directors. So when we talk about the need for engagement, the need for learning, a lot of our communities are really interested to hear from you in terms of what's going on internationally and lessons learned for us in Canada. If we could have slides, please. So in Canada, since we hosted this meeting 4 years ago, next slide, please, we've realized increased complexity in terms of decision-making and things that need to take into account in terms of our work. This goes from everything in terms of how we're set up as a federation with different responsibilities and sets of laws for different governments at the national level, the provincial level, municipal, and Indigenous levels, all need to be taken into account in terms of how we do our work. We have a number of municipal and Indigenous governments that are engaged in our process, and will be engaged in decision-making in terms of our project. More generally, what we see in Canada has been, and impacts on every project in Canada, not just the work that we're doing, is the role of lawmaking, in particular common law. Supreme Court of Canada has ruled over the last number of years on a significant number of important Indigenous issues that will impact on all development in Canada in terms of an increased recognition of Indigenous rights. And at the international level, we see the same thing. We have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and are weighing that declaration and taking that into account in terms of the work that we're doing with Indigenous people in the country. A lot of our work in terms of an informed and willing host is based on the work of the earlier environmental assessment panel called Seaborn, and it talked about three main conditions. It accepted the fact that there was a good technical solution, but talked about the need for broad public support, that it must be safe from a technical and a social perspective, which really means that not just the NWMO defining what safety means, or government or the regulator defining safety, but we need to hear from communities in terms of what safety means from a community perspective. And Seaborn told us that this must have the support of Aboriginal or the Indigenous people. Next slide, please. So this gives a bit of an idea on the journey that we've been on in Canada through the Nuclear Waste Management Organization from 2002 up to where we expect to be in 2023. Number of people that we met with in our study period of time, about 18,000 Canadians, 2,500 Indigenous people, 500 specialists, had information sessions in every part of the country. So all of this input went into form what's been called adaptive phase management, which is our plan for dealing with used nuclear fuel in the country. A few things that we were told that were top priorities. One, safety and security is the number one priority, so that works across everything that we do within the NWMO. The idea that as this generation needs to take action, we can't sort of kick this problem down the road to future generations to deal with. This is both from the point of view of finding a solution, but also from a financial point of view. So the idea of having the trust fund put in place so that it's not a financial burden on future generations is also important. That we must work to meet the best international standards and practices, and that we need to be adaptive. We need to be adaptive to changes that happen socially, scientifically, technically, politically. So there's a lot of things all at play, all at the same time. So our program, Adaptive Phase Management, is both a technical method and a management system based on the very best in terms of science and technology, but significantly also taking into account the knowledge from Indigenous communities. The NWMO just recently passed a policy for the recognition of Indigenous knowledge, and so Indigenous knowledge, that knowledge from the Indigenous people of Canada, from our wisdom keepers and elders, will play a role in terms of informing our work from a social perspective, from a scientific perspective, from a technical perspective. So all those things need to be taken into account. In terms of where we've got to in the last 4 years, we've gone from 22 communities that were part of our siting process who had put up their hands and said that we want to learn more about adaptive phase management. We've screened down to 9 communities that are part of the process. All of those are in the province of Ontario, and it's Ontario that has about 90% of the waste that needs to be taken care of through our program. Over the next little while, we plan on doing some of our first boreholes. Up to now, we've done mainly desktop studies and some walking of the land. In particular, all of that work in terms of being out on the land with our scientists and our geoscientists has been done hand in hand with Indigenous people and other local knowledge holders as well. So when we try to work in a collaborative fashion, we try to demonstrate that every day in terms of the work that we're doing. Next slide. So as we move forward, we've gone from this notion, this important notion of a willing and informed host to partnership by saying that this project is only going to proceed with the involvement of the interested community. That's the community that put up their hand in the first instance, saying we're interested in learning. Also with the First Nation and Métis people, so this are the Indigenous people of the country and who would be located in that area, and other surrounding communities working together or in partnership to implement this project. So partnership is going to be a key feature both from an assessment point of view, but from a social point of view in terms of sharing opportunity, sharing risk. Some of, as I've noted, Canada is rich in terms of social considerations from a transportation point of view, from a partnership point of view. The NWMO continues to learn. When we talk about working with communities, we're talking about a joint learning process. We have find opportunities for us to share our studies with communities, but also at the same time to learn from communities what's important to them and what sort of important knowledge that they can bring to bear on our project to make it a safer project and a more socially acceptable project. So sustaining engagement is our challenge. And inside the NWMO itself, all of our divisions, whether it's engineering and safety, whether it's geoscience, or whether it's social and public engagement, we have to work hand in hand because all of them inform each other in terms of the important work that we're doing and going forward into the future. So we were given a limit of 5 minutes, so I think I'm probably at my 5 minutes. I want to thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this very concentrated presentation. Maybe at this stage, one question. You were talking about transportation and social acceptance of transportation. One can understand in a large country like Canada, but it's also questions that can be that other countries can be faced with. Could you give us some implication in terms of social dialogue around a transportation question?
So we've just really started our work. In all of our presentations up until now, we've taken advantage of talking about what other countries have done in terms of transportation of used nuclear fuel, or what Canada has done in terms of transportation of other forms of nuclear waste. We're embarking on work right now to do some public attitude testing about transportation and to begin to work with communities in terms of establishing really a principle-based framework of how can we talk about transportation. So identifying those key safety questions that community people have and the sort of principles that should inform our work. So it's pretty early in terms of our work on transportation, but it's really trying to get a principled approach and having that foundation in place from a principled point of view to expand our dialogue as we move forward into other years.
Okay, thank you very much. Still on the question of social acceptance, we'll now move to Japan. Last year I was invited by Japan. I had the chance to make a conference there. I thank NUMO for organizing that. I was very impressed by the involvement of many people in those questions, many different players. And one can understand that in the context of Japan, it's a very challenging question. So we will be very interested in hearing from Japan the experience on this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretariat, for giving me this occasion of giving you a short summary of current status of the siting of DGR in Japan. Slide, please. In Japan, recognizing the accident at Fukushima as a failure of risk management in a country prone to natural hazard, industry and regulators have been taking actions to significantly reduce the occurrence probability or frequency of severe accident by carefully addressing the technological, human, organizational issues brought to light by the failure. Nevertheless, as the real consequences of severe accident, like contamination zone, are still available everyday news and social media, people are inclined to take negative attitude toward anything nuclear, disregarding major improvements to the safety of nuclear power plants realized. They express strong distrust of nuclear enterprise and the government and claim the difficulty in the implementation of deep geological disposal of high-level waste on Japanese islands, which are famous for their many active volcanoes and faults as a major stumbling block. In response, the government amended the basic policy on the final disposal of the specified radioactive waste in May last year, recognizing the radioactive waste management as a key issue for the present and future use of nuclear energy. The government emphasized in the revised basic policy the importance of first, as shown in this slide, steadily promoting the policy to realize DGR while securing the reversibility of the policy and the retrievability of the waste for the future generation. Second, communicating to the public the importance of both realizing a DGR and showing the public's respect and gratitude to the communities that volunteer to participate in the process for the siting of DGR. Third, providing communities in municipalities with information about the geological suitability of the area for siting a DGR. Fourth, supporting the initiative of communities in municipalities to learn the DGR project by providing them with information, opportunities, and financial support. Next slide. In accordance with this revision, the government decided to distinguish all areas in Japan into three categories: potentially more suitable area, potentially suitable area, and potentially unsuitable area for siting a DGR, establishing a criteria for the distinction in terms of rock type, rock structure, natural process and resources, groundwater, and distance from the coast or harbor. Next slide. Needless to say, next slide, please. The identification of areas is the first step for a long way to go, as a significant part of Japan will be distinguished as potentially more suitable area. The government expects, however, that the identification will spark national and community debates on the issue, and the government and NUMO, my organization, has decided to support the activity of groups of residents and communities in those areas to deliberate the merit and demerit of accepting the survey by NUMO as a service to the nation, taking into consideration of the lessons learned from the failure in Toyo Town that officially submitted in its acceptance of our site survey to NUMO in 2007. As a preparation for the publication of the distinction within this year, NUMO is holding a public meeting that includes small group discussion in various cities. I think our number is about 26 of the country. And preparing a deep, peer-reviewed generic safety report that gives us confidence that we will be able to make a full safety case for DGR at an appropriate selected site on Japanese islands. We believe that the communication of an active exchange of opinion within a diverse group of people as a competent, caring, and faithful organization is essential in the endeavor to decide the site for DGR in Japan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation. So I understand that the next step now is to have a dialogue with communities in suitable areas. Can you maybe give us some highlights about how you will proceed with the community concerned and with their concerns as soon as they are declared as suitable?
Yeah, we just decided to announce the wide areas of Japan as a potentially suitable. So not identifying any particular municipalities. So we're still wait and see phases. But key point here is to establish a national consensus on the importance and safety of DGR. This is key forever. So the first tier of our activities to continue our dialogue activities in every part of Japan. And secondly, if we identified a good small group of people in particular municipalities, then who want to entertain some kind of lessons or learning process, then we focus our resources to that particular area. That's our ideas or strategies. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. So with the update in Japan and Canada, we had a focus on social acceptance and siting. Now we will probably move to more scientific and technical challenges. United States has a long history and a large diversity of nuclear waste. It has also a very large scope of research, probably the largest one, I think, in the world. And even recently with the initiatives around research and development on deep boreholes. So I think we can learn much from the United States. So I will give Andrew Griffith the floor to give an update about those questions seen from the DOE of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers and the sponsors of this great event. I think the discussions here have started out extremely well, and I look forward to the next several days. So in the United States, I'm sure a lot of you have sensed that there's a lot of excitement there, and there was a recent announcement on Sunday regarding the top 4 college American football teams in the nation, who will all be competing for the national championship. And you asked me, why I choose that exciting news over perhaps some other exciting news in the country. Well, I think the analogy is really, appropriate for this group. Rather than one team that's going to succeed and actually achieve the national championship, we are all members of national teams. However, we aren't competing against each other. We're actually teammates, and we're actually cheering for each other, and we're going to be celebrating each other's achievements, as well as learning from each other's challenges. And we all have a number of challenges to experience before we're all successful. But I think working together, we'll get there. So I think events like this are very important in exchanging ideas, both lessons we've learned that have succeeded, as well as lessons that have learned that haven't succeeded, so that we can all learn together going forward. So with that, I just want to announce that my position has changed. We have reorganized in the Office of Nuclear Energy. We've established a standalone waste organization, which I'm proud to lead. And so you'll notice from my introductory slide, if it gets put up there, that it is, I've got a new title. So moving on to the next slide, please. I've been asked to talk about the science and technology that goes into a geologic repository design. While that is extremely important, I think in the context of having a waste management system, we have to design a system that can not only achieve the long-term benefits of deep geologic repository or disposal, but we also have to design the near-term steps that enable us to achieve progress, recognizing that we have a lot of, especially in the United States, a lot of different needs. We have shut down commercial plants that have inventories of spent fuel at them that require disposition. And the communities there, while they might have benefited from the electricity that was generated from the old plant that's now shut down, they never signed up to be a permanent storage site for the spent fuel. So we have to be sensitive to those needs and move the fuel away from there. And what we believe is the most effective and efficient way of having a consolidated interim storage facility away from those shutdown sites. But then also we have the operating sites that have fuel that need to be addressed. And we have legacy Cold War era defense facilities that have generated waste over the decades. And while that inventory is fairly well known, it's very well fixed, it's not all in form that's ready for disposal, we need to have a disposal capability for that waste. And so we've developed the concept of an integrated waste management system, which not only has the capabilities of one or more interim storage facilities for these wastes, but also can plan for, and it has to be emphasized, the geologic disposal of all of these wastes. Because none of these steps are going to be successful without that last step in establishing paths so that all paths do lead to geologic disposal. And whether that geologic disposal is for a commercial waste-only type of repository, a defense waste repository, which might be simpler because the characteristics of the waste are different. But also the option to have deep borehole disposal where we have some smaller waste forms that could be disposed more simply in a borehole, if you will. But it's a multi-decade process. It's not clear how things are going to unfold and where things are going to end up. But I think the concepts that have been successful in other countries, and we're looking to our colleagues to the north in Canada and really looking at the phased and adaptive type of process that they've identified as a model that we could definitely benefit from. So we're in the process of trying to design not only what the siting process is for these various waste facilities, but also how do you define, how do you scope the different parts of an integrated waste management system. Next slide, please. And so recognizing that all paths lead to disposal. We know a lot about volcanic tuff geology, a lot. And while the siting issues and other aspects of the Yucca Mountain project led the Obama administration to suspend the project about 6 years ago, we recognized that we needed to learn more about the other geologies where communities that are interested in hosting such a facility, if we were to design a spent fuel and high-level waste repository in their communities, that we would need to learn more about those other types of geology. So we've embarked on a research project or a series of research projects to better understand these different geologies, such as salt, clay and shale, granite. And going back to my initial comments about partnering with international partners, we've benefited greatly with the partnerships that have been established, both multilateral as well as some bilateral cooperation. And we really do appreciate what we've learned with others, and we hope to contribute to that conversation as we go forward as well. And so, without getting into the technical details on this technical talk, I think the concept is clear, is that options are good. We don't know what the future is going to be like. Our hope is, and this is where I will talk a little bit about the transition to the next administration. Over the last year, since we started the consent-based siting initiative and started to develop or define some of the components of an integrated waste management system, we believe we've established a good foundation with a fairly broad base that have enabled a range of options that could be employed. Now, the transition is only beginning with the new administration. Their priorities have not been identified to us yet. We don't want to only listen to the headlines in the media because it's not always accurate. But we believe we've established a good foundation or a good base on which, when the priorities are identified, when the plans are developed, that we've learned a lot over the last several years. We think that the next steps for the United States can benefit from that foundation. And we look forward to supporting the challenge. And we appreciate all the support and the partnerships that we've formed over the years. So thank you very much, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation. As you said it, and of course, I will not ask you any political question, just in the intermediate time between two different administrations. I will more focus on the changes. What are for you, from your point of view, the biggest changes for spent fuel and waste management? Are they technical? Are they social acceptance, linked to social acceptance? I know that you try to deal with this question with a consent-based approach. Could you give me your view on that? What are the biggest changes?
Yeah, I think quite clearly, and it's a good question. Quite clearly, and most of us here are engineers or scientists, we feel comfortable with this technology. I don't think there's any insurmountable challenge that we're going to face. I think, depending on what we do encounter, it'll be a function of time and resources and how to address any kind of challenge or question that we face, and that we will find an engineering solution to implement a safe solution. Because I think the foundation of all of our work has to be accomplishing the work safely. And while we all appreciate and understand the ability to protect humans and the environment with the technology that we're comfortable with, the general public is less aware or less confident, if you will. And so I think the social sciences and our ability to work with others and allow them to come to their own conclusion, I think the worst thing we could do is say we're going to educate them on the right way to do things, when I think that's a totally wrong approach. I think we need to present our case for why we believe things can be done in a way that protect people and the environment, allow them some resources independent of us to arrive at their own conclusion. I think at the end of the day, I think they will see that there is a national need to manage this material. I think there are communities, states, and tribes in the United States that would be willing to learn more about how they could play a role in the solution. And I think the most important next step is to start the conversation. The hope is that the conversation will lead to building relationships. Ultimately, we believe it will lead to building partnerships. And the idea is that that's going to be an enduring partnership that's going to be, decades, not only in the establishment, but you have to maintain it, and it's going to take hard work to maintain that partnership. So these are all really important steps. It's easy to sit here at this point in time and say, oh, yes, we'll just go through these things and it'll all work out. We all know things don't happen by themselves. It's going to take a lot of work. And I think the social sciences and the sensitivities associated with what individual communities' values and what's important to them, their priorities, I think is going to play a big role in how you move forward successfully. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. At this stage of our panel discussion, what struck me, and what struck me also concerning the discussion this morning, is that, well, actually the technical and scientific knowledge about ICGR, we have it, and we are all convinced that it is a workable solution. But after the question of social acceptance, and after there is also the question of implementation. And in the second half of our panel, we move toward implementation. Implementation, it means designing, engineering study, in a cost-effective way. It means get the permitting, get the license, in terms of safety in particular, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of regulation, and it means also financing it and operating it. Of course, we are all relying on the polluter-payer principle. It means that it is a charge for the radioactive waste producer. And in France, one of the main radioactive waste producers is EDF. In France, as you know, ANDRA is an independent body. It is in charge of managing, designing, operating the DGR. But of course, being independent doesn't mean that we are not accountable in front of our financer. The financer being, of course, the producer. Moreover, EDF has a large experience as a mega project manager, and we have much to learn from them. In the last 2 years, we have been improving significantly our relation between EDF and ANDRA towards a more transparent, more strategic, and more mature relationship. It is focused now really on important real issue, and the real issue is how we will implement designing and construction of the DGR. So we are in a design phase, very operational one. Then after it will be the construction phase, which is not very far away. So EDF is today represented by Mr. Giraud. Could you give us some highlights about your expectations in such a project? Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. What are waste producer expectations, and especially EDF expectation? Maybe the first slide? Then okay, this one, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that before being a waste producer, EDF is a major nuclear power operator. We have 58 nuclear units in France in operation, producing 400 terawatt hour each year. We have new nuclear plants to come. And I can say that low carbon emissions electricity generation is a base of our strategic model. So nuclear is a key point for EDF, and nuclear acceptance is really important. So when you see that, of course, to complete the nuclear generation life cycle is a key point, and you can see the importance of having an operational geological repository. To give some quantities, actually, the amount of high-level waste and intermediate-level waste, the future waste already produced by EDF is about 5,000 cubic meters for high-level waste and 33,000 cubic meters for intermediate-level waste. As it was just said, EDF is responsible for its waste. It's French law. It's also EDF will and commitment. And I can illustrate the EDF commitment in waste management. For example, a visible aspect of this commitment is what we have invested in waste management facilities, such as Centraco, such as Cycle Life facilities, such as ICGR, which is a French facility. The first and the fundamental expectation for EDF is that the effectiveness of an operational geological repository. Maybe we can have the second slide. Okay, thank you. To have that, we have two key points. Of course, we have to underline the importance of all the research and scientific works done, but we also have to underline all the actions concerning local stakeholders and territory development. And we can say that to this regard, representative commitment and government support are fundamental. The second expectation, which is linked to the first one, is of course safety. ANDRA has the responsibility of the design, the construction of the geological repository. So ANDRA has to ensure safety, but EDF also has to ensure safety for its waste, because we still stay responsible for that. We can say that these requirements, safety, mainly oriented all the R&D and design efforts that has been undertaken over the 25 past years. Today, the study by the Safety Authority of the Safety Option Report, released by ANDRA in April, is a key step in the safety demonstration process. And the review of this report by an IAEA mission reinforces this process and these results and its results. A third expectation, of course, from a nuclear electricity producer, but also from electric users, is the optimization of the design and its quality of the techno-economical governance of the project. Of course, as required by law, and as a radioactive waste producer, EDF has to finance the cost of their long-term storage. We already took these costs into account in our provisions and in the cost of electricity. As a conclusion, I would like to say that one more important expectation from EDF is to be associated to the project governance and to have the opportunity to contribute to its success. First, because we are very much concerned, and the CGO success is of prime importance for EDF. And the second reason is because we are able to mobilize our nuclear project experience, our engineering and research competencies, our nuclear operator experience, and also our waste management operator experience. So we are able and we will. It's important for us to have the opportunity to bring support to UNDRA and to the CGO project success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this stage, maybe one question. In newspaper, there are many comments on EDF financial constraint and context. Of course, to the question, is EDF able to finance CGO? I can imagine the answer. Of course, it's yes. As you said, there are some assets and provisions in front of that. But could you tell us what are the financial challenges seen from EDF about CGO, particularly in comparison with other investments that EDF has to also to finance in the next years?
Yes. The answer is we are able to finance our part of CGO, of course, and all this financial context is structured by law. So EDF has to respect the law and these requirements. So we have to have a provision, and we have to ensure this financial provision with specific assets, secured assets that can match the future expenses needed by CGO and the CGO project. So to give you the amount, today we have 8 billion euros in our provision for waste management.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move now to our last presentation in this panel, and now let's come back to the beginning, because we are coming back to safety, and as we are all telling to our public and stakeholders, it's safety first. So it's normal that at the end of the day we finish with safety permitting, and as I said, it is absolutely self-evident that Finland gave us an update on that. Because they succeeded in giving a construction license. So it's a pleasure for me to give the floor to Jussi Heinonen.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I will not go in very much detail about the Finnish situation and what we have been doing and what are the conclusions. If you are interested, you can ask me questions during the panel discussion. Can I have slides, please? So this was my topic, and I tried to generalize something based on the experience that we have had in Finland during the last few decades, what we have been doing, and what I see as an important points for the successful reviewing by the regulator in this licensing step that we have had. Next one, please. Just to keep it very clear, I identified a few things about the regulatory functions. Of course, there is IAS standards being more specific on that. But I think the basic functions are that you need to develop and maintain the regulatory requirements. That's the basic safety thing, that you need to have the requirements that the implementer is trying to fulfill, and by fulfilling them, they show that it's safety. The safety is demonstrated. Then the regulator is responsible to develop the process, how they verify and how they assess the safety by themselves. So implementer is responsible for the demonstration, and regulator is responsible for review and assessment. We need to be able to do that. And to do these two things, you need to develop your own competencies and resources. And that might sometimes not be so easy. It might take time, you need to have the competent people, but that's of course critical to be able to make a review and assessment that you can argument by yourself, that you can defend by yourself. So this is the more technical part. Of course, what you have been learning and hearing today and in many these kind of meetings and conferences, that the communication and interaction is a really important part. We see really important that we have been communicating and interacting with Posiva, who's the implementer and now the licensee of the disposal facility. Then we need to communicate and have a dialogue with the decision makers, that they have understanding what they are deciding and that they understand what the regulator is saying about the safety. And then of course that the regulator has an important role in our mind in the communication with the public. Next one, please. So this is not very well developed. This is something that I have been thinking during this autumn in different situations. So I tried to grasp here some of the elements that a little bit more detail that what you need to do in different phases, because what we have been learning today is that many countries are in different phases. Some are a little bit more progressed, some are in the siting phase, some are planning. But like was said, that we are all in the same side. We should all be learning from each other. So I used here the kind of early phase conceptualization siting that could quite many times, that could be quite long time. It can be several decades. I think for the regulatory side, that phase you need to develop the general, at least the general requirements for disposal safety, kind of the highest priority requirements that the implementer tries to fulfill, hopefully fulfills. Then I think it's really important that the regulator has a strategy for competence and resource building. So you don't need to have all the resources and competencies at the first step, but you need to have a plan that when the project goes on, from siting to the licensing and then construction and finally to the operation and then the closure, what kind of competencies you need to have in different phases, and then to have a plan how to acquire them. That can involve, of course, own research, review of the applicant's material, international cooperation, different kind of things. We have had quite a lot of interaction with the Posiva. We have tried to have a dialogue so that we understand what Posiva is meaning and what we are meaning and so on. So to facilitate that, we agreed with Posiva to have quite a lot of review of the preliminary developing safety case material that Posiva were developing, and we gave kind of early opinions about that, what we saw that are important things. So that has been one part of our education, our competence build-up, that our experts have been reviewing the Posiva's developing material. And what I have learned, many countries have similar systems that we are reviewing the early safety cases. I think, and this might be something that we should discuss a little bit more in the international community, is the communication with the public and the regulatory role in the early phase. Because there is no license application, there is no real safety demonstration to evaluate, and what's the regulator's role in the public communication. I think there is a role. There is a need to have the regulator in place, and for the public to have, in a way, maybe independent organization that they can discuss with. But that it's not. I think we don't have really clear picture and accurate picture how that should be done. So in the licensing phase, coming from the development of competencies and requirements and so on, understanding, when you come to the licensing, I think one crucial thing is that you have the criteria for decision making. For example, in stepwise licensing, like we have construction license, and then there is operating license and periodic safety reviews and so on. What's needed to give a positive statement about safety in construction license, and what can be left to be addressed later on. I think that's really important. Of course, for that you need to develop the state-of-the-art requirements, but quite often they are a little bit not that detailed because we don't have a lot of experience about this type of facilities yet. So you need to have the criteria, and based on that you need to have the review strategy. The safety cases, the licensing documentation, they are really broad. You are not able to review everything in detail, so you need to have a strategy and plan. What are the most important things, what you go in really deep, what you might have, in which aspect you do your own safety assessment, safety evaluation, or safety analysis to re-evaluate the things. And then what's the even more difficult part, that you need to be ready to make a conclusion about the safety in design phase. So if you are an operational license review, you need to make a conclusion about the safety of as-built facility. But I think this is something that we regulators need to develop a little bit more sometimes, to be brave enough to make the conclusions. And to be able to do that, I think the criteria and review strategy are the key elements. So we did that. I can tell you later more about details about what kind of processes we had in place to be ready for the construction license application review. We had these kind of elements in place. What we are now doing is that we are updating our safety requirements for the facility construction and also for the disposal facility operation. We are evaluating our own processes for review and assessment and inspections for the construction period, and then moving to the commissioning and operation period. And then I think we again need to develop the criteria for the decision making for the operational phase. I think it's more concrete, it might be a little bit more easier, but that we need to do. And all the time we have been communicating quite a lot with POSIVA. We have been communicating with the ministry, the decision makers, and we have an ongoing dialogue with the public from the regulatory side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I particularly appreciate your presentation of a very progressive approach. Everyone has to keep in mind that all our projects will remain first of the kind, and this progressive approach is a key element, a key aspect of project development. In particular, when we are entering in a more operational phase of design, permitting, construction. It's directly linked to the concept of reversibility in France, adaptability, step-by-step approach in Finland. Can you give us some more details about the kind of process you are implementing, in particular on the question how you get the guarantee that the questions that have to be solved at one step will be solved as the following steps by POSIVA, the operator, the research institute, etc.
Okay, that's a good one. So in practice, a little bit background. So we evaluated POSIVA's construction license application, and then government issued the license a year ago. The license didn't have really safety-related conditions, so there are some other conditions, but they are not really safety-related. But we made, as a safety regulator, other separate decisions for Posiva, where we identified 80 different elements that they need to develop in coming phases of the project. And of course, this poses, in a way, a risk to the implementer, that there are some, in a way, open issues that they need to address during the process, and there is no real guarantee that they can demonstrate that it's safe. So this is the risk. And of course, Posiva was also concerned about that, and we had the discussion. So we have required Posiva to develop plans how they address these topics that we have raised. So we have set requirements, then Posiva has prepared plans how they address that specific topic, and then Posiva has submitted those plans for us for review. And then we have had discussion about that. We don't approve the plans, but we have a dialogue and kind of understanding about that it seems okay process if you do it this way. We also think that you can address and solve the issue in the time you need to answer. So this kind of process we have. It's quite based on, of course, planning and then dialogue, that we understand what's the concern, what could be the meaning effect if this doesn't be solved, at least the way that it's thought to be, and then to have a kind of understanding.
Thank you very much. Now it's up to you to ask for questions. And so I give the floor to our moderator, Mr. Papillon.
Thank you,
give you the floor back.
Like for precedent and previous session, if you have questions, you can raise your hands right now. You can ask them directly. We'll provide you a microphone. And I also have the cards, and remind you that you can use cards. I already have 4 different questions. If you have them close to you, you can write them down, and they will be brought to me. So it will allow us to engage a dialogue together for this Q&A session. So maybe I could start with a question that has been brought with a card. You were just talking as a regulator, and there's a question about regulation. It's especially for Japan and Canada. As a site selection for DGR is a very long process, it's important to start communication with regulator in early stage in order to avoid going back to square one. What is your communication plan with regulator? So maybe for Mr. Robert, Robert?
We have really good relationship with our national regulator in Canada. We meet regularly with the regulator, both from a social point of view to update the regulator on where we're at in terms of our engagement process. And we also meet with the regulator on a regular schedule in terms of some of the technical advancement that we're making in terms of safety, in terms of vessel design, in terms of ideas about transportation casks. So everything from how much copper should be put on the vessel that would be going into the ground through to where we're at from a safety point of view. One of the things in particular in Canada that from an engagement point of view that the regulator is particularly interested in is our work with Indigenous people in Canada and respect for Indigenous rights in our siting process.
Okay, and Mr. Kondo, what about you?
Yes, thank you for your question. And in our case, it's too early to talk about the regulation. But we, NUMO, is in the process of finalizing the so-called generic safety case report of DGR, and we hope that we will submit this report to regulators, and hopefully regulator will respond in many. I don't know, but anyway, this is the kind of kickoff, start of the communication. So we hope we will have in a short time the communication.
Okay.
Regulators.
All right, thank you. Other questions which are more or less involved with previous questions, but more than regulatory issues in general, it's a focus on uncertainties. The question is, the implementation It is sitting, construction, operation, involves long time scales. Long time scales usually imply uncertainties in the project. What is done to address these uncertainties, and what approaches are applied to reduce uncertainties and risks? So maybe, perhaps, from the US point of view, maybe? Mr. Griffith?
Yeah, well, we're not currently entered into a licensing process. However, in concept, clearly it's going to require data and then modeling to project how the performance of the repository will continue in the centuries to come. The more information or data we have today, or analogs that we have today to draw the data from, the better those models will be. And so it's kind of a simple approach right now. While we had a process and models that reflected the volcanic tuft of Yucca Mountain, those would have to be developed for the other geologies, for the clay shale, the granite, or salt geologies in any other repository. On top of that, though, is our current regulatory framework. We have a broad, non-geology specific regulation that is decades old. Mm-hmm. And if we had to proceed to geologies other than volcanic tuff, those performance standards would have to be revised. Yeah. And so that's a process that hasn't started yet, but it's been identified by the Blue Ribbon Commission in 2012 in their recommendations, and that any step forward beyond the volcanic tuff geology would have to, one of the initial steps would have to be the development of those regulatory standards, and that would drive the performance that any other models would have to be geared toward for our approach.
Mm-hmm. And what about France, Pierre-Marie Abadie? Because, of course, you're a bit farther.
It's a common thing from France, but more global, actually. One should keep in mind that the safety demonstration, in particular the long-term safety demonstration, is a question, but implementation is another matter. Mm-hmm. And nobody should think, let's do it. Implementation is an easy task. In implementation, it means design, it means construction, it means operating. There are risk and optimization, risk on one side, but many optimization in the design and then construction phase. We have to deal with that. Let's call it incertitude, but it's part of the normal project management. You have also risk in construction phase. Let's keep in mind that the construction phase is a dangerous phase, not in terms of safety, but in terms of health and security for the workers. Mining industry is dangerous, tunneling is dangerous activity, and so on. And there will be incident. We have We had casualties in our laboratory twice in 15 years.
Fire is a problem. Fire is a danger.
Fire, construction accident, etc. And in operation also, you have to keep in mind that you have nominal scenario, but you have also incident, and you have to be resilient to incident, and you have also to have consequences, controlled consequences, even on extreme scenario. It's one of the lessons of the post-Fukushima stress test. So, and last point, you need flexibility, because there are incertitude on such a long term. There can be change in technologies, there can be change in energy policy, and so on projects that will last many decades, in France even more than a century, you have to be flexible and adaptable. So incertitude, risk optimization is really part of the project, and even after the safety demonstration, long-term safety demonstration, well, the job is starting.
Yeah, it's not finished yet. Okay. Are there some questions before I continue reading? Maybe? Direct questions? No? No especially yet? So another question, which is more or less linked again with what we just told you, reminded Fukushima stress. And there's a question which is about these problems in general. The question is how to be prepared to possible changes in public acceptance after accidents or nuclear facilities worldwide, for example, as it was the case for Fukushima, but it could happen again. And this could, of course, change all the acceptance where there's acceptance. And is it considered in your DGO project's development? And if yes, how? Any management program of such uncertainties is there in the project? So who would like to answer this question? Mr. Griffith, maybe?
Well, I think public confidence in the organization is going to be a major factor in how successful a response is. I think prior to any kind of unexpected event globally, there will be a lot of speculation until the details are known about an event similar to Fukushima, if it should happen again. But I think the organization's performance, its credibility in public, the ability, it's the public confidence that it's already established. I think with any community that you've partnered with for a disposal facility or a storage facility, I think the relationship or the partnership that you've already established will determine how successful you are, whether you're able to survive that or make it through that when questions arise. Because if you've done your job, if you have established a sound relationship, if you have a sound partnership, I think you'll be able to address it successfully and be able to continue. I think WIP is a perfect example of that. I think some of the public or the community response that I've heard is, come on, get on with it already. And that DOE is taking a very cautious approach, and they acknowledge taking a cautious approach because they want to be sure. But I think that's part of how you build that confidence in going forward, and the ability to be resilient to those types of events.
And what about you, Mr. Kondo, after Fukushima? Was it particularly difficult, hard to carry on the process?
Yes, as I said, we are, in a sense, a kind of miserable state of the trust. But nevertheless, we are doing our best to inform the public that this very activity is very important for our generation. So with that, we try to be honest enough to explain what we are thinking, and we are eager to listen to the voice of the public and how to implement their voices in our planning and so on. This kind of communication, dialogue, will be the basis for the recovery of the trust, I believe so. And in addition, as you mentioned, the uncertainty. Yes, we cannot escape from uncertainty. Yeah. Our life is full of uncertainty. So with that, as she said, resilience is very important. So resilience in our planning and in our communication to show the public that we are resilient to the voice of the public is very important. And through these kind of activities, we hope we'll recover in some days the trust of the public.
So you're confident. Okay. And Pierre-Marie, you wanted to add something?
Yes, maybe a comment saying from our perspective and experience, and coming back to what Virginie Schwartz this morning brilliantly explained us. Of course, it's a long journey, and so incident, accident, political change, etc., they will occur. So how can we get robustness? And what our experience is that you need a robust institution and robust process. Institution, typically an independent safety authority with a higher authority. Typically a broad support by the parliament, but also a broad support locally, because local community accept our project because it is national interest, but they're expecting support from the national level and recognition and finance and economical development. So institutions, but also process. And process, it doesn't mean a rigid process. It means flexible process, but a process with clear milestones and clear phase. In France, we decided at the beginning, 91, that we would have 15 years of research. Only research, with a laboratory. No decision, no citing, only research. And in 91, it was not self-evident that the CGO project would be in Bure-Saudron. It is after, in the second phase, which was a siting process, that it concentrated around Bure-Saudron, which is not exactly at Bure-Saudron, it's not very far, a few kilometers. And after the siting process, you have the design, the permitting process, and then construction, and then the pilot phase. The pilot phase is also a part of this process, and it is identified like that. The pilot phase is not a pilot facility. It's really a pilot phase. This is a time where we will have definitive infrastructure, but also pilot units, and also demonstration for the next phase and the following demonstrations, particularly in terms of sealing typically, or innovation and optimization.
That
so
would take
the fact that we have a
years.
process with milestones identified from the beginning and giving us opportunity to tell to the stakeholders, okay, in this phase we will answer this question, but this question is not possible to answer in this phase, it will be in the following phase. And I think process institutions are key elements.
Okay. Somebody wants to add something? Yes, Mr. Giraud.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in France, when you operate a nuclear unit, each 10 years, you have to re-demonstrate your safety, the safety of the unit. You have challenge each 10 years, and you have to show that you are up to date given the recent experience feedback. So it's really a progressive and a constant demonstration effort. And of course, the main support is to give information, information to public, to technical information, factual information, in order to put the discussion on a factual aspect. And it's maybe you can be challenged. Maybe it's not already. It's not every day easy when you have an event or something like that. But you have no other choice than to give information and to show what you do to ensure safety, what you really do in the 2-day safety management. And in fact, in the unit we operate, one important support is the information that employees give to the population around the sites.
Friends, families.
Yeah, because they can explain with a simple experience, a factual experience, how they work, and it spread confidence around the sites.
It's more concrete. It looks
it's
less
concrete,
risky,
it's simple,
less terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are many questions about these topics, and one has just arrived, which is the continuous of what we just said. Addressing uncertainties requires understanding of these consequences. It's linked to what you just said, what the public understand about these risks and uncertainties. The question asks, does the regulator measure communicate levels of potential consequences so that the general public understands that not all uncertainties have the same risks and consequences? How can the regulator have built this understanding with the public? It's a question for you, especially as regulator, Mr. Inonen. How can you do that? How do you build that?
I don't know how we can do it. We have tried some things. That's a topic that we are quite often discussing at home, that how to describe to the public or also to the decision makers that what are the risks and how to explain the risks of disposal. Because if you are honest and if it's safely disposed, there is no risk, and that's the first thing. I can give an example. I sometimes ask that when the spent fuel is safe, how long does it take? So I answer when it's disposed. After that, it's safe. So that's kind of simple answer. But I think what we do, we try to compare. Of course, there is radiation is everywhere. We try to illustrate that. There is a big radon problem in Finland. It causes a lot of more problems that the disposal would ever do. One thing I think maybe comes from the history that there is a lot of misunderstandings by the public about what does the waste look. It's not liquid, and so on. And the risk, what's the risk of spent fuel disposal? It's totally different compared to what can happen in the nuclear power plant. And I think what was said this morning is that the people can understand. They can understand many things if you just explain that there is no, it's different kind of system. It can't explode. You can bring it by groundwater to the surface, so it takes a long time. So it's easy to explain these kind of things, but you need to be ready and not too specific. And then I think being a technical person, you really need to try to forget the uncertainties and not stick with the uncertainties as well. It most likely will happen like this, but I have really small uncertainty that this and this and this might happen. Of course, you need to be ready to discuss also about that, but give the main point that it's really different and it's really safe, and these are the main reasons why it is safe.
Do you have a lot of interactions with the public through social media, for example, on these topics, on these questions? They want to learn more?
Well, if I give an honest answer, and we discussed a week ago also with the Swedish colleagues that, well, in reality, the public is not that interested. Well, to be honest, we have a bit of problem. Well, some persons are really interested, but the general public is not that interested in Finland. So if we organize a meeting, a group of handful of people come, most of them they are the same that come every time. They might be opposing. It's not discussing of the majority of the public. So we have a little problem of that. We try to be active in the internet, in media. We give a lot of interviews in the media. We try to be active in the social media. But
okay. Thanks, Jean-Paul. I think you want to ask a question.
It is just to complement the reflection. It is important, naturally, to have the safety demonstration now consideration for the uncertainties in the long run. But don't forget that the repository will be operated during decennia. And during those decennia of operation, we will learn a lot. Also, R&D will not stop. We will gather experience and knowledge during all the operation period. But the question will become crucial when we will have to decide to close the repository. And it is also a new authorization. At least in our system, we need a license to close. It is very different from a reactor. We need a license to open, but we need a license to close. It's quite specific in our system. It is at that moment that we will have to make the complete review of the standalone, the passive system, as we say, passive safety. The standalone is possible. And it will be a long process because the closure is foreseen for the next century.
Okay, thanks for the precision. Are there other questions? Yes, of course.
A question to Mr. Heinonen as well. In addition to taking part in international fora for regulators, what sort of bilateral or multilateral exchange do you have with regulators from other countries? And what sort of, if you could give examples of things you do or don't do.
What are you discussing?
Yeah, I can try to give some examples. Of course, we have quite a lot of cooperation with SSM from Sweden, that they are reviewing the similar concept at the same time, the license application. So we had cooperation with them during the review. We had quite a lot of cooperation beforehand. We participated each other's workshop, for example, that we had both of us organized workshop related to the, for example, review of the safety documentation or safety concept. So we have been participating in each other workshops to learn about what's discussed. So we have that kind of technical cooperation with Sweden, and then we have had with France, with ASN cooperation related also to the regulatory functions more, because the concept is a little bit different, so there is not that many things that you can really technical level discuss, but we have had cooperation. Now we have started, I think last year or this year, started a cooperation between the 6 regulators from certain countries, and now we try a regulatory group that we are developing ideas about related to licensing and kind of addressing issues related to license that we have identified. And of course we do this also in IAEA project and NEA project, so that's similar thing. But just to highlight one thing, what I think we should concentrate a little bit more and maybe to discuss is the licensing system. And then what I mentioned, what is needed, what's enough in which step. So I think 2 aspects. What kind of licensing system would be good for this type of facility, which is first of a kind, and it's kind of developing in sequences. You learn something and then you learn more. You don't construct everything at one step. Is the one license, for example, really good for this? And then what are the criteria that you need to fulfill in different steps? Because that would support the regulatory work also, to have internationally agreed some kind of framework that this is the way that we can go on. It's not so easy to make end-to-end decisions. You need to have a kind of lot of discussion and background for that.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Haiti Tadros, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, so the Canadian regulator, and I do appreciate the question that was asked about the International Forum and the answer that was given. Just a little bit on the conversation we just had with regards to social media. I was wondering if any one of our panelists had experience with curriculum, approaching schools, approaching different, either at the municipal level, at the state level, what kind of initiatives are in place to help provide a better awareness, about a better credibility, if you will, through the generations that these projects will take. So that's my first part. And then the second part of my question came actually from our esteemed colleague from Belgium. So is the concept of institutional control, so once closure happens and potentially bringing this to fruition and seeing green space, who is responsible? Who owns it? And are there any initial thoughts that have been had, or maybe future work that is going to be looking at that?
Okay, who wants to answer? Okay, Simon.
I can answer the second one from the Finnish side first. It's really easy. Well, basic answer is really easy, and then if you go to details, it's more complicated. When we as regulators say it's safely disposed, it's closed, everything is okay, then the responsibility moves to state. And then the institutional control is not responsibility of the implementer, so the state will make decisions about that, what kind of institutional control and how long. There is a requirement that there needs to be a plan, and also the licensee shall pay a lump sum about to cover the cost of the institutional control. So that's our system, but that's something that we know that is really not developed in detail yet. But for spent fuel, there is 100 years to think about that, so I think there is enough time. About the education or going to the schools, we haven't been so active on going to schools, but we are, as a regulator, we are open for groups to come to Stuk, and we have a few possibilities that they can select, that we have a kind of lectures and discussion about different areas of radiation and nuclear and waste management. But I think, for example, nuclear power plants and Posiva might have been more active in local schools and so on discussion on those and engagement.
Thank you. Andrew Griffith and then Robert Watts, you wanted to react.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the first question, and I think the engagement with the local community and the schools especially is going to be absolutely essential. Regardless of the facility we build in the United States, it's going to be an intergenerational type of facility. And to do so, we can't just start with the community leaders. We have to start with, yes, the community leaders, but also the children of that community as well, because they're going to inherit anything. And so giving them all the information we can early, I think, is very important. And then being able to maintain that throughout their as they grow, as well as their children in the future. And I think social media, especially today, is going to be absolutely essential of reaching out to the younger generations, because they do communicate much differently than we did when we were their age. And so that's really important. From a government bureaucracy standpoint, it's going to be a major challenge, at least for the Department of Energy, to do that. We're going to have to figure it out if we want to be successful. Or, like the recommendation is to form an organization outside the Department of Energy that may be more flexible and more innovative in that respect. That's another option for the future.
Okay, Robert Watts.
So first I wanted to mention one other thing about our regulator in Canada. There's a bilateral relationship between NWMO and the regulator in terms of keeping the regulator up to date, but the regulator also makes itself available to community groups to come to Ottawa to visit with the regulator, to find out the role of the regulator. Likewise, the regulator goes out to communities to meet with community groups. So our regulator has been active in terms of being responsive to community people, both in municipalities and in First Nation or Indigenous communities in Canada. On the question of curriculum, we've started in the last year and a half or so to focus some of our resources on youth. And so some of it's more like from a STEM program point of view, working with youth in terms of science and technology and math, some in terms of life skills. And they've asked us to focus some of our energy in terms of curriculum. We've been invited into schools to make presentations. Likewise, some school groups, when they go on school trips, will come to our offices or may go and visit a nuclear facility in terms of education. But we're just going to launch a project in the very near future, working with some Indigenous communities in terms of development of curriculum that will be for Indigenous students, and hopefully there'll be some good lessons in that development that can be applied right across our project.
Okay, thank you. It's the end of the session. Maybe a few words conclusion. Yeah.
Yes, on those both questions. On the question of education, not to be too much optimistic, our experience is that it is a sensitive question. As many years ago we tried to make presentation in schools, it was not accepted at all, and we were accused of brainwashing the kids. First remark. The second remark, as Jussi Heinonen told it, no, but of course this topic is an important topic. We are all mobilized for that, but the real interest is not so high. There are on one side local communities which are interested in the local impact, which is in a certain dimension much more on the direct impact of construction, operating, and not so much on very long-term safety. And on the other side, the interest linked to nuclear opposition and linked to the debate about nuclear phasing out or not phasing out, which is a difficult question because if we try to override this question, then there are many other questions linked to environment and safety that should be discussed. But we are blocking on the question of yes or no for the nuclear. Maybe only to soften this point of view about education, it remains important to work on education, but in much broader dimension than only nuclear waste or nuclear, and more generally, more in terms of science, science understanding incertitude, and understanding debated questions, and so on. It's much more on that point that we need to make progress, typically in France, but I think France is not the only one. And the second point is about institution control and closure. To follow the point of Jean-Paul Minot, everyone has to keep in mind when it is closed, it is closed. Of course, there will be monitoring after, but at the end, it will be, if it is decided, if the decision for closing it, it will be closed. So the point is the decision that is, to close it, as Jean-Paul Minot said it, but another point is that it won't be taken only at the end, it will be progressive. Every generation will decide to go further, and the further you are going, the more difficult it will be difficult to retrieve it and to come back. So the nearer you are from the closure. And everyone has to keep it in mind, and it is typically linked to the milestones. There is not only one milestone, opening, operating, and then closing, but regular milestones in terms of safety and governance.
Thank you, Pierre-Marie Abadian. We'll continue this conversation just in session 2 about the French project. And thank you to all panelists for taking part to this session 1B, Mr. Robert Watts, Sushiko Kondo, Andrew Griffith, Olivier Giraud, and Jussi Ainonen. Thank you very much for taking part. So now let's have a 25 minutes break, coffee break, and then afterwards, session 2. Remember, mostly in French, but you have headphones and you have everything be translated in the headphones in English. Okay? Thank you. Okay, we're going to start session 2. Thank you. Take a seat. Session dedicated to the French Geological Disposal CGO project, and as we're in France, welcoming country, and that most of speakers will be French, we propose you to conduct this specific session mostly in French. Of course, if you have questions in English, no problem at all. They do all understand English, or they have headphones in case. And the same for you. You must have found headphones besides your seat in a kind of a pocket just down. And you can put them on, and they should be connected on in English. On va faire un petit essai.
Let's have a test. Let's run a test. And the speaker is kind enough to thank the interpreters for their difficult work on this technical topic. And I would like to ask now if everyone can hear the interpreters.
You have a little... No, you don't hear me? Vous m'entendez là, comme ça?
Can you hear me now? Does anyone else have interpretation issues?
Vous avez la traduction en anglais, tout le monde?
Does everyone hear the interpretation in English? No? Okay.
Which channel? What? One? You're all on one? Okay, please, first channel. Switch on first channel, and you should have English translation.
You should have English interpretation on channel 1, English interpretation on channel 1. I'm sorry for this technical housekeeping. We're preparing for this session in French. It will be chaired by Mr. Jean-Yves Ledoux. He's an MP, and he is a member of the Parliamentarian Office for Scientific and Technical Assessments. So we will have a brief introduction, and then we'll have a round table where we can all ask the questions about the project. But now, please, I'll leave the floor to Mr. Jean-Yves Ledoux. First of all, good afternoon. I'd like to salute the speakers at this roundtable on geological repositories and waste management in France. I am very happy that I was asked to chair this roundtable. I have worked on these issues at the French Parliament. I've been working on this for 30 years. I was first elected 30 years ago as member and repeatedly chair of the Parliamentarian Office on Scientific and Technological Assessments. It is a French body made up of 18 MPs and 18 senators. And the purpose of the body is to conduct research on technological and scientific issues in order to explore eventual needs prior to legislation, the eventual needs of evolution and development of the legislation. The idea is to have a long-term perspective in a way that garners broad political agreement or at the least consensus. Our advantage is that we are a mixed delegation of MPs and senators, but also we have members from different political parties and horizons at the national level, which means that a study emanating from this body is more likely to go through the long legislative process. Of course, for a law to be adopted, there has to be a long process between the Senate and the Assembly. Since 1990, 26 years ago, since then, I have been working on the difficult issue of the management of radioactive waste in our country. And I'd like to tell you an anecdote. At the time, the ANDRA didn't exist. There was no body in charge of this, and the Prime Minister at the time, and ANDRA was part of the Commission on Atomic Energy, and at the time Michel Rocard was Prime Minister. And he had led this up to the Commission and said that there would be surveys in 4 French departments in order to put up a repository in the Maine-et-Loire and the Loire-and-Seine, in these 2 administrative regions. And when the people inhabiting these regions saw these operators come with the surveying tools, it was a revolution in the region. The Prime Minister had no power over the Parliament, asked us to think about this issue. And the office was seized with the Senate, and it was the first thought given to management of waste in France in 1991. There was the report of Christian Bataille. There was the first law that was adopted on waste management, and it gave birth to the research laboratory. And it also created the pillars of research on disposal, reversibility of the stored waste, on separating the waste, on transmutation, separation, and basically the management of waste. And all of these different paths of research were explored with the first law in 1991. In the framework of the parliamentary body, in 1992, I published a report on very low activity waste when the French legislation was quite inconsistent and patchy. And this, of course, led to situations where there were irregular types of disposal of this waste. And so we had opted for more control, better information, better regulation for the industry of medicines and of scientific research. And then another law was adopted at the Parliament. It was also prepared by our commission, the Technologic and Scientific Assessment, in 1996, and this law built upon the recommendations of the rapporteurs. And the third law we will talk about a bit later on we will go into the details of this act. It was adopted. It was a law on CGO. It was a modification of the legislation that manages stalking. It was instigated by senators and MPs alike, and I also contributed to speeding up the moving towards better transparency vis-à-vis the population when we talk about management of radioactive waste. In 1998, I was asked by the Prime Minister, Lionel Jospin, to draft a report on organizing nuclear safety. It was entitled La longue marche vers la transparence, The Road to Transparency, and this gave the basis of the law on transparency and security for nuclear issues. And I recommended to merge nuclear safety and radiological protection, and this is the case today. I also opted for the independence of these authorities, and this is the case today. The creation of local information commission, and to keep this bond with the local population, which is extremely important. And of course, managing both the civil and military nuclear programs. And this also created the Commission of Assessment. And every year, the Parliament can raise questions to both the Authority on Nuclear Safety and the Commission, as we've heard recently. So as a brief introduction, we will have a historic perspective on the development of ANDRA. And I told you a bit about the birth of ANDRA. And Mr. Frédéric Place, who is head of research at ANDRA, which is the independent authority that we created. I forgot to mention this before. It used to be part of the commission, the Energy Commission, but then it became an independent authority. And so Mr. Frédéric Place will tell you about this historic perspective, and then we will have a debate on CGO. I'm going to tell you a few words about our bill proposal on CGO and how the Parliament approached this issue. I am delighted to be here today because this is a major issue. We, I think, opted for an approach where we have an exchange between the Parliament, the authorities in charge of this issue. And we also talked about this in my region because I'm an MP from Lorraine. And this is the region where was built the laboratory where the CGO project was conceived. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all later. Thank you for this introduction, and now I'm going to give the floor to Frédéric Plat. He is head of research and development at ANDRA, and we're going to go back to the adventure of CGO.
Well, it's a pleasure or a privilege for me to present the story of the CGO project, but it's also a great challenge to draw a past of 20 years, 25 years in 20 minutes. So I try to do my best and to focus on what has been the most relevant milestone of this first part of a long story, because we hope so that the CGO project will be accepted and will be put in practice during several decades, as has been said in the next session. Well, as discussed during the next session, it is very important to see in front of us, but it's also important to come back to the past, to see what has been the different milestones, what have been the different objectives, in order to clearly understand where we are and where we are going to move, and to move for the future. Well, CGO is a very long story, and we will navigate on this timeline. This is not a straight line. This is a curved line, but not a snake, not something hazardous, but a timeline which is under the control of societal and, of course, political governance. And we will move through my presentation at different steps of this timeline. So back to the future now, and let's start our journey in time in 1991 with the French research law on radioactive waste management. Just to call you, it was a law with three axes of research: one on separation and transportation, another one on long-term, not disposal, but interim storage, and of course deep geological disposal. Over 30 candidates volunteered at this time, and taking into account the existing knowledge of geological, and taking into account the political and socio-economical situation, 4 districts were selected by the French government to have investigation. This was one district, the Vienne district, which is a granite, and 3 districts, one in the Gard department, which was a clay formation, and 2 districts in the east part of France with the same clay formation, which the name is the Calovo Oxfordian. These 3 sites were approved by the French government in 1994 for the construction of URL in each site, in order to study and to verify the feasibility of a deep disposal facility. So at this time, we start the first field primary investigation, mainly focused on geology, on hydrogeological properties of the site, and all relevant studies for the implementation of an underground laboratory. Taking into account the results of this preliminary investigation, and taking into also account the dialogue with the local representation, ANDRA submit to the French government in 1996 the license for the construction of 3 underground research laboratories on each site, funding of a primary safety evaluation that could deal with the feasibility of a deep geological repository. Application of this underground research laboratory were reviewed by different bodies, of course the Nuclear Safety Authority, but also the National Assessment Board, which was created by the 1991 law, but also by the different local representatives, both social, political and economical representatives. At the end of 1998, the French government decided to focus on the Meuse-Haute-Marne site, and the license for the construction of an underground research laboratory was granted. The construction of the French URL started in 2000, and this was the first of the beginning of the experimental program. Here you have some view of the beginning of the French URL with the sinking of the shaft. And the shaft was, everything was achieved in 2002, and we start the primary experiment in order to acquire data and evidence to demonstrate the feasibility of a deep geological repository in the Calovo Oxfordian. Here you have different photographies of what has been the first phase of the French URL. In 2005, taking into account the huge quantity of results about geology, waste, about engineering barriers, about technology, about safety assessment, all these data were collected, analyzed, and reported in what we call in France the dossier 2005. This dossier 2005 took into account the different waste to be generated by the French nuclear fleet during the lifetime, as well as the variety of historical waste already accumulated. And all these results supported by a safety assessment conducted en droit to consider that a geological repository was feasible in the Karlovo-Oxfordian formation, as well as on long term, of course, and that reversibility, as requested by the French law, was possible in that condition. In the dossier 2005, we define what we call in France the transposition zone, which is a zone of about 250 square kilometers, where the characteristics of the geological media has been considered as similar to those which were acquired in the Bure URL. And of course, this zone was the zone where we considered the feasibility of a deep geological repository. Two mandatory reviews were made at this time, one by the National Review Board and another one by the safety the Nuclear Safety Authority, and an international review by the Nuclear Energy Agency, committed by the French government, was also done. And all these review, or all the outcomes of this review, conclude that they were very favorable to the feasibility of a deep geological repository in the Karlovo-Oxfordian on the transposition zone. At the same time, a national public debate was also launched by the French government in order to find the different the various positions of the stakeholders. In 2006, another debate took place in the French Parliament, and this debate led to a new law, the 2006 law, which considered now that the geological repository was a safe solution for the radioactive waste management, and draw a new map for Andhra, in particular, to move to the preparation of licensing for the commissioning of the repository in 2015. As a matter of fact, the Bures site was reputed to be the one selected as investigation and surveys that were already made from the surface, and more importantly for an underground laboratory. An important act after the French law of 2006 was in 2007, where an environmental monitoring was given a tool to start the long-term assessment of a project impact, starting with defining the initial environmental state and long time before any construction of a future CGO project. This is what we call the Permanent Environmental Observatory, OPE, which is the first monitoring body of the CGO to study the element of environmental simultaneously, water, soil, air, fauna, flora, but also human activity, in order to prepare the assessment of what could be or what should not be the influence of CGO in the future over the territory. Of course, after the law of 2006, we intensify the field work on the transposition zone in order to get a more homogeneous view of the geological media with new boreholes, new seismic investigation. And in parallel, of course, during the field investigation and further experiment in the URL, a new emphasis was put on technological development according to the roadmap of the 2006 law for a licensing application of CGO. And that's why in 2009 we defined within the transposition zone a restricted zone, which is called in French the ZIRA, which were proposed by Android to the French government, and this zone has been considered by Android, taking into account also the different reviewers and the local elected representative, the emplacement for the future underground facilities of CGO. And in 2009, we committed a new survey campaign, in particular with 3D seismic survey, in order to get a very deep, detailed view of the geological media of the ZIRA. This slides summary the huge effort made in 25 years from the regional scale to the ZIRA made by Android to support the incremental development of CGO from 1991 to 2010. And this illustrates the necessity to get a very huge database to decide what could be exactly the precise location or emplacement of a future deep geological repository. At the same time, in 2011, our underground laboratory was granted an authorization to continue its research activities until 2050, and this is very important to support the further development of CGO. Well, in fact, the CGO name did not appear in 1991, but it appeared in 2011, and this is important because we move from a deep geological repository to an industrial center for the industrial geological center, and this change of name emphasizes the fact that now CGO gradually shift toward an industrial project, and gradually more detailed, refined studies were undertaken on the safety, the architectures, and the performance, and the technology. And so this date is very important in the history of a deep geological repository in France. And this is illustrated on this side, where you have three steps of the design of the repository, starting from the design in the dossier 2005, which is a very preliminary design, and the design of a sketch phase in 2013, where you can notice the big change in the architectures of a deep geological repository, taking into account technico-economical optimization, but also the increase of knowledge of a different component of the safety system. Well, here you have now a quick overview of what is currently the CGO project, and this will be developed by Frédéric Lenot. Currently, the CGO project, this is two surface facilities, a nuclear facility for receiving, inspecting, and preparing package, and a non-nuclear facility, which is for the shaft and the construction work, and of course the underground facility in the clay, and this will be developed by Frédéric. An important other step was in 2015 the public debate. A new public debate on CGO was initiated and scheduled for 4 months, and 14 public meetings were planned in Meuse-Haute-Marne, but also in different different sites. Even if the public meeting were blocking, the independent commission in charge to organize the debate extend the public debate by 2 months and define new protocols, in particular debate on internet, partnership with local press, and in parallel a citizen conference was also organized to obtain an informed opinion from the public. So we considered that this public debate was a success and was very important to move forward on the project. So the next and the most important step is currently 2016. The dossier 2001 was a scientific and technical dossier in support a feasibility principle of a geological disposal. Now we move as an operator with the dossier 2016, which is a dossier that includes the major safety options that guide the project design, a proposal of UNDRA for the practical implementation of reversibility, and a master plan of operation. And this master plan is something very important. This is a key document that describes a reference scheme for the operation of CGO that supports its incremental development. And this master plan gives a clear and updated picture of a project and its development over one century with the different important milestones, and it presents to the future generation what could be the decision at different steps of the development of CGO. Of course, safety has always been the first priority and the ultimate objective of the project. So the safety option dossier, what we call in French the DOS, which is a very specific process in France. It's something very important in the development of CGO, because this is a stage of dialogue with the nuclear safety authority to prepare the license application by presenting its safety-related principles and processes before the licensing application, in order to verify that everything is okay and we can move now to the licensing application. Of course, in this process, we have to consider that CGO project is incremental and reversible during one century, and it is designed to retain the flexibility to allow future generation to modify the project and to decide if they stop, if they move. And the concept of reversibility that has been presented has been precised by UNDRA. And this is a tool of management with different practical tools, and retrievability is one of the tools of the reversibility. But reversibility is a tool for the management, clear, open tools with the different stakeholders in order to mark the different steps of the future development of CGO. And that's why in 2016, a reversibility act was passed in the parliament, taking into account the different opinion and defining exactly what should be the reversibility and a tool as the retrievability for the future CGO project. Well, where are we going now? Well, the next important milestone now is our application for a license, or what we call in French the DAC, for authorization of creation, which is scheduled in 2018, and to start this initial infrastructures work and preventing archaeology will be initiated before the DAC will be sanctioned. So we are now moving for the licensing the license application of CIGO in 2018, and this will be described by my colleague Frédéric Lono. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frédéric. Merci, Frédéric. Je propose maintenant à...
Thank you very much, Frédéric. I now suggest Jean-Yves Ledéo come back to the lectern to ask you a question following this very fast presentation. It's true that to summarize 25 years in such a short amount of time, it's difficult, but you were working at the OPEX and you followed the creation of UNDRA. What were the part played by your parliamentary office as regards the various players, UNDRA, but other institutional players as well? Well, I think that first of all we had permanent contact with UNDRA on the one hand, but also the general public. So first we decided on an underground laboratory and then a deeper geological repository. And following what you've heard, well, there was not a real debate because some even prevented this debate from happening, and some came back to the question of subsurface storage. 20 years ago, we had made a decision for a deep geological disposal because with the reversibility option, I'll mention it later, but with this option, it was a good way, depending on the technical conditions, to have a high level of safety for storage with the triple barrier, which was a quite old concept, but some decided to challenge this decision. So we said that for us, what the research had shown was that it was important to store waste in deep geological repositories. The risks were mitigated thanks to this technique, but we had to define before the law the concept of reversibility. The 2006 law stated that we had to define this concept. That's what we did. We started to have the discussion upstream with members of parliament from the right, from the left, from the Senate, from the National Assembly, and we managed to have this definition of reversibility. It's the ability for generations to come to either continue the construction and then operation of the various layers, or to reassess the decisions and choices made by previous generations and to make changes to the management solutions. That was the definition of reversibility, which meant that the facilities had to adapt. Mr. Chevet will talk about it later, but the direct consequence was based on the properties of clay and of the underground laboratory to retrieve the packages. After the public debate, which was not a real public debate, there was a debate on the internet, a citizens' debate. I went myself to Bure to organize a meeting one day, and that was something that was, I think, quite important. We decided to move to a pilot industrial phase. We discussed it with UNDRA as well. And this pilot phase meant that when the project would be launched, we could have feedback on the first industrial phase before moving on with the project. With the CIGO dossier analyzed by the safety authority, by the National Commission of Assessment on Research, which has hearings with the Parliament, my office as well, and we will transmit these various assessments to the commissions. It means that, first of all, we did not leave it to future generations to settle the issue, which could have been the case with subsurface storage. And I often say that you can be opposed to nuclear power, but in any case, we'll have to address the issue of nuclear waste. If we do not address this issue today, it means that generations to come will have to address it. So we've shared responsibilities between a decision that is made today and also the possibility for future generations to reverse this decision. But I'm convinced, and that's my personal belief because I've been working on that for quite some time now, I think that we've chosen the best solution, because what's imperative is not to leave it to future generations to make decisions about the management of nuclear waste. Well, thank you very much for being very specific. I suggest we now move to the rest of the history of CIGEO, this storage facility, and now I'll give the floor to Frédéric Lenot, in charge of this project at Andra.
On peut passer les slides. C'est celui-ci.
Je veux devant, là où je reviens.
Je vous remercie.
Le temps, donc c'est 5 minutes.
C'est parti.
Mesdames, Messieurs, si vous le permettez.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may, I'm going to give my presentation in French because it's very difficult to take the floor after what has been said. It's a difficult act to follow, but I'm going to talk about the CIGEO project, the project as it stands today and as it will be developed tomorrow. The CIGEO project is the result of 25 years of history, of research and development, 25 years of feasibility studies, and of various scoping studies that led in 2011 to the launching of an industrial project. It was an incremental project for the development of CIGEO based on the first design and based on a draft project that was quite basic, and you can see the result of that work on the slide. I suggest I explain to you this slide. This project was used to draft the various technical documents that made up the literature that was submitted to the safety authority and also to Andra, following the various public debates that took place throughout the history of CIGEO. Today, these CIGEO facilities, such as you can see it on the screen, are two surface facilities, basic nuclear facilities. One is located in Haute-Marne, French department, to receive waste packages from all over France. It prepares it, packages it, and transfers it to an underground facility that is 500 meters deep. There is a second surface facility that makes it easier to carry out the works, successive work that will lead to the final architecture of the facility. This final architecture has not yet materialized because of the inventory of nuclear waste that we have to do, high-level activity, low-level activity, long-life waste. And so This will happen over a century, and it will be operated over more than 130 years under an incremental process, and the operation will be a step-by-step process and a gradual process.
Illustration.
To illustrate what I'm saying, the first phase, construction phase, which will lead to the pilot operational phase, will only build the one part of the final architecture, that is the shafts where the packages are going to be lowered down into the storage area, and the surface infrastructure on top of it. It will also include a pilot area for storage of high activity waste, high level waste, and in the pilot phase there will be only 4 cells for storage of long life intermediate level waste will be stored and operated, and the rest will be added step by step over many years to end up in 2080, in the year 2080, the final architecture for long life intermediate level waste and high level waste. Some of that waste has already been produced, but the rest is future waste that has been taken into account and will be produced by the French industry in the years to come. This is the reason why we think that this project will achieve the final architecture around 2100, and it will probably be operated until the year 2150. The development will happen in gradual phases, and it will be an incremental process, which is essential to ensure reversibility, which Mr. Ludéo mentioned. Reversibility aims at taking into account new developments in the years to come and even in the centuries to come. So let's have a look now at the history of that project before we talk about the future. Autumn 2015, in the area where the surface infrastructure, surface facilities will be built, we started the first archaeological diagnosis. And on the basis of the end of the first phase, we started drafting the first design phase. We drafted a summary pre-project containing the main technical elements, which we call safety options case, and they include different technical characteristics and need to undergo consultation and approval by Parliament, which is also the case of the development plan of ICGR, which includes or covers the entire history of the site up to the year 2150. And this is very important in the governance of the project. This file, this document, is going to be fed with all the amendments and comments, and it will also be one of the essential pillars of reversibility of the site. Reversibility built on technical requirements, but also on requirements linked to the governance of the site. In July 2016, as Mr. Ledeu recalled, a law was published, which we had been expecting since 2006, and this law lays out the definition of the term reversibility applied to a long-term project like CGO. But less than a month ago, an international review took place, which reviewed all the safety options and submitted a report to the Nuclear Safety Authority. And I would like to thank all the international partners who agreed to examine our safety options that were presented to the agency. So the inventory to take into account, of course, plays an important role in the design of CGO, and we have long life and high activity and intermediate, high level and intermediate level waste. 1/3 of the waste is already produced, but the remaining 2/3 will be produced after going through the treatment facilities of the French nuclear plants. As regards the long life, the ILLL, half of the volumes to be stored is already produced, but the rest will be produced in the years to come by the nuclear plants. This inventory is the result of the history of the French nuclear industry, both in research and power generation. There's a huge variety of waste and therefore a huge variety of containers for the primary waste packages. So we have to have various types of containers in order to provide the right container for each package of waste produced in France. So we are looking at a huge variety of containers for ILLL waste, and for HL waste we have a more standardized inventory of containers. There's there's a smaller number of elements, of technical elements to take into account for these. We use steel carbon, of course. We have 6 different types, or carbon steel, sorry, and we have different types of shapes as well. Now, about the pre-project, it served as a basis for the technical case, which was submitted to the safety authority and was used as a basis for public consultation. So we have the surface facilities, which are linked to the underground facilities by 5 wells, 5 shafts which are going to be used as support functions and will be used also in the construction phase to excavate the material when we excavate the excavated material. These surface facilities are linked also to the railway network, which will make it possible to transport, to to transport the waste by rail in the future. The waste packages will take a ramp. It's a funicular, actually, which has been specifically designed to bring the waste packages down to the underground facilities, 500 meters under the surface. So it's 4.2 kilometers between the surface facilities and the underground facilities. The underground architecture is made of galleries which give access to the different storage cells, and of which you can see a typical cross-section here, where you see the disposal package and the disposal chamber, and you can see the access drift, and a handling cell just before the disposal chamber. We also have a handling cell specifically designed for HLW, which are 100-meter long and only 70 centimeters in diameter, and can contain 7 to 20 containers. And of course, they will answer all the criteria, the safety criteria. And there will be a system using a pushing robot, which is going to stack the waste packages into the cell head. It is the argillite layer that is going to ensure the containment of the radioactive waste, and the carbon steel overpacks will ensure the safety during the transient phase. Now, of course, most of the handling which will be done in the facilities will be automated, of course, because of the dangers of this linked to this type of waste, and we don't want, of course, human beings to be handling these packages. Now, to conclude, I'd like to say a few words about the future, if you allow me. At the next ICGR session, which will take place in 2020, if everything runs well, the license application will be under review by the safety authority, and will and in parallel on the Meuse and Haute-Marne sites, the construction phase will have started, and earthworks will have started, and more specifically, the different connections to the external networks, to the railway networks, water network, etc., will be in progress. But we also need to think about what happens after we receive the license, and what happens during the construction phase, during the pilot phase. So we will be in a very active consultation phase, consultation with the different contractors and companies which will be entrusted with actually building the first facilities. So let's meet again in 4 years' time, and I will tell you, I hope that everything is running well, and let's hope that everything will be done according to plan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frédéric Lono. So we have We have an appointment with you in 4 years' time. We don't know exactly where, but we will meet again. That is for sure. So I'm now going to give the floor to Jean-Marie Gervaise, who's project manager in the Meuse district and follows the CGO project very closely. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. I would like to convey the apologies of the prefect of the Meuse district, Mr. Demulsan, who has asked me to deliver his speech on his behalf. So what are we doing? We are actually preparing the host territory for this great project, CGO. And in my speech, I will say a few words first about the area and the stakeholders. And then I will explain the approach that we have chosen in order to draft an area development contract for the project. This contract is something that is it is a common project with all the stakeholders. It all started last summer upon request by the Prime Minister, who asked the state services to start working towards drafting this contract. We set up technical experts groups which were to submit technical papers. 14 such groups, working groups were set up, and a steering committee was tasked with the governance of this process, associating all stakeholders. Andra is represented in the working groups, of course. This is a map of the area, the region we are talking about. We've recently had an administrative reorganization of the regions in France this year, and this has put the area concerned in the midst of one of the biggest regions, French regions, the Great East region. And the site is right in the middle of this map. It is also located at the boundary between two French départements, the Département of the Meuse and the Haute-Marne département. As you can see here, in blue. So as you can see, it's really in the middle between the two départements. This project affects many municipal groupings, and these municipal groupings have also been impacted by the recent administrative reorganization, which will come into force in January 2017. So this has required us to reorganize the whole project and the municipalities. Now, this project, CGO, is a major industrial project. We've heard this several times this afternoon. It covers 550 hectares of surface installations, 190,000 square meters of surface buildings, 270 kilometers of underground structure, 10 million cubic meters of excavated material, and over 2,000 people working on the site. At its peak, the cost was estimated by the Ministry in charge of energy at 25 billion euros at the beginning of this year. So it is a major industrial project which is going to take place in an area which is highly rural, mainly agricultural, territory. So you can imagine the huge gap between this high-tech industrial project in the midst of forest and agricultural land, not really sparsely populated département with only 192,000 people in the Meuse and 181,000 for Haute-Marne, with a density of 31 people per square kilometer and 29 people per square kilometer for the second département, and with an area, the Joinville Basin, which has even a lower density with 19 people per square meter and even 14 people per square kilometer, in Haute-Sault, which is another municipal grouping. Now, as regards legislation, we have the Programme Act enacted on the 28th of June 2006, which defined the deep geological disposal as the best response to the need to dispose of high and intermediate level long-life radioactive waste, but it also included specific provisions in order to prepare the geographical area for this type of project. The law foresaw a public interest, the establishment of a public interest group in each département with financial resources and a clear commitment, the necessity for a clear commitment to develop the economy of the regions, and therefore asking the operators to contribute actively to developing the local economy. Article 13 of this law provides that alongside the lab, which has been in existence since 2000, a public interest group would be created with representatives of the government, representatives of the ANDRA, and representatives of local authorities, that is, the regions, the département, the municipal groupings, and the municipalities. So all administrative levels have to be represented in this public interest group. The objectives set by the law for this public interest group are the following. It has to manage the infrastructure in order to facilitate the construction and operation of the lab and the facility, prepare the region for this project, making sure that training takes place so that the competences and skills will be found in the region, and take actions to develop, promote, and spread scientific knowledge in conjunction with ANDRA and other public players, of course. Therefore, two public interest groups were created, one in each département. So we have one for Haute-Marne and one for Meuse, which is called Objectif Meuse. And each public interest group currently receives 30 million euros per year, which they use to prepare the territory, the region, to this project. Of course, numerous stakeholders are involved. The state, for one, but also the regional council, the two département and departmental councils, the two public interest groups, the municipal groupings, and all other public cooperation bodies and municipalities, chambers of commerce, business, and trade associations, etc. All these stakeholders which is always the case in France. We always have numerous stakeholders. So with so many stakeholders, it is, of course, necessary to coordinate their work well to avoid overlaps or everybody working in different directions and towards different objectives, and to ensure consistency between the different entities. The prefect of the Meuse department, which is the person which represents the state at the departmental level, was entrusted by the Minister for Environment, Energy and the Sea with a mission of coordinating the actions in the two departments, for which task she can rely on a two-headed team composed of Mr. Demulson and myself. Local development mission we're called. And in a letter dated 9th of June 2016, the Prime Minister asked the prefect to draw up a region development contract to ensure that all players will work in the same direction and on the same topics. The topics covered: the transportation infrastructure, roads, railways, waterways. In Mr. Luno's presentation, we saw that the CGO site was going to be connected to the railway network. The role of this working group would be to think about how useful this connection, this railway connection, is going to be beyond the CGO site, using maybe connections or facilities built for CGO in order to attract other companies. Because other companies will probably find opportunities to develop once CGO is commissioned. And the region has to take this type of economic development into account. But it also takes into account travel facilities and infrastructure. This project will attract a lot of people to work on the CGO site, which means that there will be an inflow of people, families, which will require schools, social infrastructures, housing, etc. And the region has to take this into account and to plan for this development. The regional development contract will on the basis of the needs identified by ANDRA, i.e. the need for road connections, water, etc. So the aim of the contract is to make sure that what is required by ANDRA can be used in other ways as well to create synergies between the development of this major industrial project and the more general economic development of the region, so that the development of this industrial project is not done to the detriment of the region, but to its benefit, and that it leads to an improvement of the economic situation of the area. The contract is also, or builds on the official commitment of the different partners and stakeholders involved. And in the contract, we define clearly the financial contribution of each player.
This is a substantial task. We have 14 thematic working groups, and to this day, So since the end of the summer, we've had 45 thematic meetings. And we went theme by theme and studied each of the different proposals. We're still at the study stage, but we would like to have a steering committee which will approve of these recommendations, and this will enable ANDRA and CGO to be able to effectively and properly find its place within the territory. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for delivering this presentation. Please sit down. We're going to move on to the Q&A session. Mr. Jean-Yves Ledéo, please come back up on the stage. And Mr. Chevet, Pierre-Franck Chevet, as well as Pierre-Madi Abadi, Denis Stolf, and Jussi Heinonen, who's at the head of STUCK in Finland. Now, for all of you, you can ask your questions in English. They will be understood and interpreted. And you can also write questions down on the forms that were given, that were handed out. Now let's start with those who haven't spoken yet. It's the beginning of the meeting. And we have the honor to have the representative here from the Nuclear Safety Authority in France, Mr. Pierre-Franck Chevet. I would like for us to tell us what was the exchange, the interactions with ANDRA and all of the other stakeholders on this project. First of all, I'd like to point out here that I was lucky enough to work on other things than nuclear issues. And another thing is that when you combine nuclear and waste, you're walking into complicated territory. There's the industrial waste issue, which is quite complicated as such, but when you combine it with the nuclear ground, it makes it very complicated, but of course indispensable. So for this type of project, you need a stepwise approach at all levels. The work that is done by OPEX is also done in a stepwise fashion, because you have different stages, 2006 and then 2016. This is also an incremental approach, and I think this is very appropriate for this type of project because they are long-term. Now, when we look at it from the industrial and technical point of view, the incremental approach is also appropriate, especially for this type of project. It's first of its kind in France. And we also have this approach here at the National Nuclear Safety Authority. And so we've had permanent contact with the different stakeholders, first of all on the laboratory, and also now that we're in this pre-industrial stage of the project, so of course contact is intensifying. We talked about peer reviewing organized by the International Organization for Atomic Energy, and we would like to learn from other experiences. And the first thing we want to do when we're launching this type of project is see what we can learn from others. So 2 important points to be made. First of all, an incremental approach, and of course, look at what's being done elsewhere. There's a very strong dialogue amongst ourselves, but also with our fellow peers on the international level. One last point I'd like to make. For us, ANDRA is an operational agent on the ground. And so are we, because we have the authority to say no. It's our role to set boundaries when it comes to technical issues, and this is a very classical approach. But for a project as CGO, we have a somewhat schizophrenic behavior. Now, I know that this isn't very reassuring because we are talking about nuclear issues here. But what I'm saying is that we will fulfill our role, but we are also a stakeholder who supports this project. If we don't have this type of solution, we will have a a safety problem in the middle term. And so we are for this project as a principle, and namely for the upcoming stage, for the request for the construction permit and the general license. You talked about the international review, Mr. Ainonen.
Review that you chaired. Pick up the microphone, yes, please.
Sorry, can you?
What are the main lessons of the international review that you chaired?
Yes, thank you. And sorry, I don't speak French, so you have
No
to bear
problem.
with me. Main conclusions. First, I would like to say that we were reviewing the safety options dossier, so that was the topic, and then we had the terms of reference. We were not evaluating the safety, we were more evaluating UNTRA's planning and the methodology for safety assessment. So no conclusions about the safety from our side. Overall, I would like to first say that for me, for example, as experts from Finland, it was really good opportunity to be reviewing a safety documentation from other country and learn about the different type of disposal concept. That was really kind of mind-opening, and it's quite different compared to what we have in Finland. Well, the main conclusions, I think we made some conclusions, of course, about positive conclusions about we saw that there is a quite robust disposal system. You can do many things with that, and it still seems to be behaving safely. UNTRA has a systematic way of assessing operational and post-closure safety. So I think our opinion was that UNTRA is in quite good position when developing the coming license application. Of course, the time schedule is challenging, that it's not that far away and there is quite much work to do, but UNTRA is quite aware of that. Of course, we were a group of regulators from different countries, so of course we did find something that could be done better and should be considered. So we made a few recommendations and suggestions, and also found a good practice. Recommendations, suggestions were related to R&D planning, for example, development of the monitoring program, overall management of the program from the safety perspective, what's needed in different steps and how to inform, for example, the regulator. And then we identified for the operational and post-closure safety a few examples that we proposed UNTRA to take a little bit closer look and reconsider those.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Monsieur Stolf, donc vous êtes, voilà, vous pouvez enlever votre casque, on va.
Mr. Stolf, you're the chair of the local information commissions. We talked about transparency and debate with the civil society. We talked about public debate that took place on CGO in 2013. This transition was made from a research project to an industrial project, and I'd like to know how you adapted to this transition. Well, we were able to adapt because the local monitoring and information commission has a main purpose, which is to inform people. So within our organization, we have, of course, some individuals who are pro-ANDRA but anti-CGO, anti the CGO projects. It's not always easy. The public debate took place. It was a pseudo public debate, really, because it was completely put to a halt by the anti-CGO group. They are against the project just by mere principle of being against it. So you're saying there was no argument? Yeah, exactly. There was no argument. They were just against the project, and that's it. But this is why we're here, why the Commission exists, so that there can be a debate. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. This was what my fellow citizen was saying before, but you have to manage waste anyway. So our purpose is to inform our citizens. In the Marne and the Oise, we know that we have a very low density regions, and we have 8 inhabitants per square kilometers in certain areas, so this is almost desertic. A lot of small municipalities, and this is where the Commission organizes information meetings when it is possible. My organization produced a movie. 5,000 DVD copies were handed out to citizens. And we hope that many people got to see that information movie. Now, at the time, we were talking about research, and now we're going into the pre-industrial phase. We talked about benefits, compensation, economic compensation. Is this something that you talk about in a more detailed manner today? Now, yes, on these very practical and concrete points, we do talk about it, and namely economic advantages. There's also some tension because some municipalities have access to these compensation rights, whereas others don't, and they're just a few kilometers apart. Anti-CGO groups are becoming increasingly more audible, and we have opponents who are becoming increasingly violent. Mr. Gervais, how do you manage these economic issues and also the increasing pressure coming from the anti-CGO group? Yes, this is absolutely true. Pressure is increasing, but we have to bear in mind that everything we do has to have meaning for our citizens. If our tools are seen merely as compensation, for example, because a poor area must be prepared for the implantation of a site, I think that we'd be missing the point if we just see it as a tool. We have to see it as an opportunity to revive a region which was much more active during the 19th century, for example. It was an industrial region. It wasn't only an agricultural region, and the region's economy did fall for many different reasons. We know now that the firms have left and abandoned this region. And we need to see this as an opportunity to respect this region's features. It is an agricultural region with a very strong forest activity, and we have to be able to offer opportunities, keeping these features in mind, but also by suggesting or offering a future for this region that everyone can share. And this is why what we're doing is so difficult. The idea is that we need to give meaning to everything that can be done by local authorities, by the government, by municipalities, so that citizens can embrace what has been prepared on the ground. Now, does anyone have any questions?
Directly by raising your hand, don't hesitate. Have you any? Not yet? Ok, alors on poursuit parce que on...
All right, so now we can move forward then. These are very sensitive issues when we talk about acceptability of these projects. And it always comes back to safety and to try and take into account rational fears and sometimes opposition that is not based on any kind of argument. Now for Andra, I would like to know how you talk about the components that guarantee the safety of the project at different stages, so long-term safety, thousands, maybe millions of years. But for the short and the middle term, how do you explain the components of your safety processes? Now, this is a very interesting question. And it touches upon what we talked about this morning. We talked about safety. And when we talk about safety and environment, when you're walking into this operational stage, we start talking about safety, operational safety, but also environmental impact. And we have to know how to provide answers on these three scales when there are questions. And you have to know that the local inhabitants will have questions about short-term safety and environmental impact. And this is what we've been working on for 25 years now. We are talking about the choice that we made, and we opted for clay with strong radionuclide absorption and other features. And this choice was made on the quality of the soil. And then you also have architectural choices with different features that decrease the risk of leakages. And then there are other design choices, such as what type of container, for what type of activity, etc. Now, of course, we are still working on these different issues, and we're working on them for the preliminary safety case. But we had already thought of the main components in 2005, and what we wanted to do was to further complete this safety demonstration without radically changing what we had decided upon at the beginning. Now, what is the new part, the novelty, is operational safety. So we were talking about, this morning we were talking about, for example, the danger or the risk of fires. And we chose tools where the risk of fires is decreased. And it's a choice that we made in 2011 and 2012. And now we're going into the detail. And this is what we're doing with IRSN for the safety case. And we're waiting for them to get back to us in the middle of the year 2017 so we can further advance on this issue. Now, certain elements will pertain to the design of the facility, and then other elements will be important for the operational launch, and then there will be other issues further along the chain. So design, then operational launch. And now I'd like to insist on environmental impact. I want to insist that we have to go into further detail. What happens if we have to deforest an area? What happens if we have to dig a certain area? And this is something that we have to co-build with citizens. Because if you say that you want to deforest an area, you have to decide with other stakeholders how it must be done. Now, I'm talking about this precisely because part of the land that we will be using will have to be cleared, and this has an impact on the fauna and on the flora. And this is, of course, in direct link with what Mr. Gervais was saying. And of course, yes, environmental impact is very important. I would like to ask Mr. Stolf a question. I think this is important. I would like to know how the CLI perceives this transition from a research center to an industrial complex or center, and how, I would like to know how CLIS will adapt, and I would like to know what Mr. Stolf thinks of reversibility on the pilot phase. And I would like to know whether they have the intention of becoming more active in the project. Now, CLIS has encountered a few issues with the term reversibility. For a very long time, it was the term that we used with municipalities so that the project would be accepted. Reversibility was something that was, it meant something that you can retrieve. So there was this confusion between retrievability and reversibility. Now that the law has given us a definition of reversibility, we accept this term, but this means that we will have to explain this further to the society, because for them, reversibility means you can take the containers out after X time, X number of years, and now that they have now that they're convinced of this, it's going to be very difficult to change their opinion about this. More questions? Hello. I'm from the Federal Agency of Nuclear Control from Belgium. It's not really a question. This is a comment on reversibility. As it is defined in the French legislation, I understand reversibility as an acceptability element. I think that it is a fundamental element for safety as well. For me, there is no great difference between this definition and what we had understood. And the other element would be radiological protection. And for me, this is the same in principle. You have to assess different options from a safety point of view, and then make a decision, the best possible choice, by taking into account the prevailing circumstances. And this, of course, takes into account all societal issues. We're very clear on this. These decisions are not final, and they can be reconsidered with the evolution of technology and different changes in society. And this could lead to a further step, which would be changing our minds about a decision that was made years ago. And for me, this is what I understand in the French legislation. And I think this is a fundamental element of safety. But when you say change your mind about a decision that was made, are you referring to what was just said? It must. Do you mean it must be possible to take containers out? No, as he was saying, retrievability and reversibility are not the same. Okay, so you agree on that. All right. Are there any other questions? Yes, we will make sure you have a microphone. Thank you. I'm Pierre Berès from École Polytechnique. You said that the minister had estimated a cost for CGO, 25 billion euros. But until recently, ANDRA had its own estimate. I think it was $31 billion euros. Now, is there any concern about this estimated cost? Because you can't quite have the same result with 25 billion euros and 32 billion euros. So I'd like to know how we can interpret this discrepancy. And does this mean that on certain issues you will have to let go of decisions that were made at the beginning and make a compromise. That was a very clear question. Yes, indeed, very clear. I'm going to try to be as clear in my response. This will take a bit of time. Now, why do we estimate this cost? First question, we have to know if the consumer's bill covers the cost. This is a question that was mentioned this morning by different people, and the Cour des Comptes looked at this. The cost represents approximately 2% on the consumer's bill. And even with uncertainty margins, it is clear that the waste part is covered by the consumer's bill. We also have an estimation of costs because this is a tool for us to monitor the project. We have to know what are the costs for the operational launch, and we want to know how we can optimize the costs, and we have to know what are the risks as well. And this, of course, is part of any project management. We were talking about optimizing risks. We know that there are risks, and we have seen this with other nuclear projects, with the scheduling problems, and this has had a cost. And when we optimize costs, this is possible with design or obtaining the best cost for concrete, best number of staff members. These are different optimization tools. But not on safety. The idea is to know, can we have this alveolar feature bigger than it is? Can we have a bigger diameter for this part? Can we have different features that can save time? It's all about technical and industrial processes. Now, the third aspect, we have to know what we have to include when we talk about what constructors need to estimate as a production cost. A document was published at the end of 2014, and a conservative estimate was published. And it ended up giving the figure of 30 to 35 billion euros. Then the government made a choice. Should they go for a conservative estimate or very conservative estimate? And the 25 billion figure is the figure which really takes into account all optimization, the best optimization possible. So this figure would be in the best of worlds. Yes, but it is also an objective estimate. We're trying to meet this goal. Now, you have to know that there is no good answer, really. What we're trying to do is we're trying to estimate the cost over the course of 150 years. Now, of course, no one knows about the price of concrete, for example, in 60 years. We know that adding 10 people on this unit or on this service will mean something over the course of 10 and 20 years, and we can't possibly estimate that cost. So this is all about goals that we have set for ourselves. What can be said for sure is that we tried to approach this debate by being very careful. So when you look at these estimates, if you look at costs until the project is over, in thousands of years, we have to look at the uncertainty, an uncertainty rate that we need to apply to the cost so that we can have a debate that is realistic.
Yes, what I would like to say is after the laws we've passed, for transparency reasons, we wanted the cost of the project to be calculated on the whole of the project, but the debate on the $25 billion, $33 billion that took place with a decision made by the ministry, I said what I thought. I said that this debate was useless because we have a $6 billion figure for construction. So in terms of scale of magnitude, we are at the same level of the EPR. And if we reach 6 billion today, it is a figure that we know. Then, depending on the design, on staff, on time to complete the facility, there will be huge variations. So I think that today, if we focus, as some have done previously, on the fact that the decrease in costs meant that we would have to decrease the level of safety, that's an unfair judgment, even though a chair of a major company said that he was able to reduce costs, which were the initial costs planned for the project. I'm not sure that this would have been approved by the French Safety Agency. And the defaults you can create in geological layers, if you do not take the necessary precautions, these can be defaults that have consequences on the whole of the project. So I think we should get the necessary information to guarantee full transparency, but we should focus on the next 10, 15 years, and Mr. Abadi said so. We should focus on estimates to plan for the costs of the French storing facility. EDF said that they would plan for 8 billion euros for now. You wanted to add something? Yes, I have a remark. As the safety authority, we intervened in the process, not on costs, but on the underlying hypothesis to see whether or not they were compatible with our vision of safety. And the opinion we gave stated that it was almost accurate, but that some hypotheses were not conservative enough. So in terms of costs, we thought that maybe the costs should be higher, when at the end of the day, we ended up with this figure of 25 billion euros. You talked about 30, 35. Well, we can conceive that if hypotheses were not conservative enough, the figure could have been even higher. But following what has been said, whatever the figure, it has been decided on by the French government, at least the first time. And the second thing is that at that time, the government committed to revise costs on a regular basis. That's what the project is, an incremental project. Within the next 3 years, we'll know more about the cost, and it will be even truer after the next 3 years. So, yes, we do work on safety and technical issues, but if we have an operator that does not have the financial wherewithal to carry out their project, well, this has an impact on safety. So, of course, it is of interest to us. These financial implications are important to us as well. Yes, I have a last remark on cost-related issues. Mr. Ledéo mentioned what happens in the first phase. That is absolutely essential because we talk about figures, 25, 30, 35. If you add additional costs, nobody understands anything. So we have to bear in mind that what we are talking about for the initial phase, which is the pilot phase until 2035, the figure is 6 billion. Including operation and R&D. And in investment, the surface facilities, the ramp, the alveolus, the high-level waste repository, it's $4 billion. So that's a major project. That's the first conclusion, but it's not something out of proportion. It's actually smaller than other such projects and major reactors. 2, it is a tenth of the higher carriage, so over the same period, so 40, 50 billion, we're talking about 4 billion investment. So that's a major object, so to speak. It is a challenge in terms of management, and we are taking the necessary measures in terms of a design, and we'll do the same for the construction part. But that is something that is affordable. And it is commensurate with the investment of the nuclear industry today. So that's something we can manage for our generation. Of course, afterwards, we have to work out the project over 4 generations. Jean-Yves Ledéo has to leave. He has an emergency. We are anyway reaching the end of this day. In a few minutes, the buses will start collecting you to go to the restaurant. Do you have maybe a last question?
For the panelists before the end of the day? Oui, okay. On va vous apporter un micro.
We are going to give you a microphone. Jean-Paul Munot. I wanted to go back to the issue of costs, if I may. Costs, that's all well indeed, but the real question is to know who is going to pay for these costs. And I think that it should be worked out over the long term, because when we talk about the periods following the shutdowns, the question that must be raised, and it is a topic that is being studied at the NEA. We've launched a working group on that. The third-party liability. Who is going to be held liable if you do not have a liable operator? Do you think there will still be a safety authority? What will happen tomorrow? These are philosophical questions, but we are talking about a project over several hundreds of years. So the economic aspects are important. And so the question is the last resort decision maker. What is the last resort liability of government, and how does this transfer of liability happen? I think we should talk about it one day or the other.
To all of you for participating in this last session of the day, session 2. Jean-Yves Ledéo, who's already left, Pierre-Franck Chevet, Denis Stolf, Pierre-Marie Abadi, and Justine Heinonen. Thanks a lot. And thank you to everyone. So it's the very end of the day, and now you're invited to reach the buses which bring you to the museum, the Fairground Arts Museum, Musée des Arts Forains. There will be 4 buses. They will leave the one after the others. As soon as one's full, there's another one. There will be 4 between 6 and 6:30. So you have an average 20 to 30 minutes to reach the point. You have to walk to the bus stop. It's not right at the exit. So you have all information in your bag, interest bag, welcoming bag you got this morning. There's a map, and there's a road map where you see where you can walk up to the bus stop. And of course, you have Mary and other persons from the organization with the red lanyards who can help you and guide you until the buses. Thank you very much. Have a good dinner and see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Bye-bye.